It's very difficult for a police officer to open up. Law enforcement officers, our suicide rate is skyrocketing. And I believe that it's something that we can control and lower. In my time as a cop, I was on the SWAT team, I was a field training officer, union president, I was a detective, I was on the street crimes team. I was well versed in pretty much everything you can do as a cop. My story, what happened to me, I shouldn't be here. I should have offed myself 2 years ago, and I tried. I almost took my life on duty. I had my gun in my lap, and it was going to be the end. Like, this demon inside of me I could not control, and I hated it. I was a bad husband, I was a bad father, I was a bad cop. I was a bad person. And I don't know why. That's not how I was raised. That's not who I am. That's not who I am now. And that was when I was going to end my life. And something happened. It was a call for service that happened where it was, I took my gun, I put it back in my holster, and I went to that call because I'm like, well, that person needs more help than I do. So I'll get back to this. That was the first time I was going to take my life. The second time I almost took my life, I even practiced it. I put the gun in my mouth so I wouldn't get scared. I had a place where I was going to go so I wouldn't devalue the property. It was right on the property line. And if I missed and bled out, I could bleed out. Nobody would find me. There was a plan in place. I had a list of everything I needed to accomplish, but I was saved by going to jail. And it shouldn't take jail to save a cop's life. All it took was somebody reaching down into the depths of hell that I was at, and they could have pulled me out. I shouldn't have had to go through that. Nobody should. And it's something that if my department was trained in and could recognize the signs of trauma amongst the police officers who, are working 10, 16, 20-hour shifts, if they can recognize the trauma and get them help, our numbers of suicide would go down by a lot, because we don't know what's happening to us. When we're having that trauma, we turn into anger. We turn into fear. And we're out there making split-second decisions, and we're not thinking right. And my therapist told me this. He told me, you shouldn't have even been out there. You should not have even been out there in the field. And I said, well, why? I can still function. He said, if you had a broken leg, would you go out and work? No. He said, you were out there working essentially with a broken brain for 3-4 years. I shouldn't have even been out in the field. And nobody could recognize what was happening to me. They just thought all of a sudden I was becoming this jerk of a cop. And that's not who I was. It's not who I am. But something was happening inside of my head that I had no control over, and I did not know how to defeat it. And I had no support. You're just going to stick it in your trauma buckets like we were told to do in the academy. Oh, push it aside, go on to the next one, push it aside, go on to the next call. But what about all those things that back there that I just shoved away? Well, they come and rear their ugly head years later. I think the younger officers are getting better at expressing themselves. My generation of cops, no. We'll drink a beer and laugh about it. We don't want to be fallible. We want to be perfect. And you have to be perfect on the street. If it looks any kind of wrong on a video, look what happens to you. So imagine going out there for 16 hours in a shift and having to be perfect. Every word has to be perfect. Every action has to be perfect. Every look has to be perfect. Your driving has to be perfect. Your walk-up has to be perfect. Your tactics have to be perfect. We go to the guns while everybody else runs away. So you have to have some sense of I don't know, like you're Superman. But Superman doesn't sit in front of a therapist and tell about his feelings. So we don't. We simply will hold them in. The incident that dumped all of my trauma buckets, and my brain went into protection mode. It was our dog got shot on a robbery. They sent the dog, they shot our dog took off, officer returned fire. That's the moment that I turned into this other person. I went from having 0 IAs in my career to 9 in a span of 3 months. And they're all internally driven. There wasn't one outside person complaining. They started watching my videos. And when they saw my videos, they generated an internal IA for you. It was yelling. And to be honest, they're right. They were right. I was not the same person I was years prior. I could not control my rage. And that was how I got my kind of dopamine, or my release was I would just yell. And then it would release the tension, because what I was feeling was pain. And I didn't know what was wrong with me. And I was diagnosed PTSD prior to this, but I didn't know what it was. Yeah, there was a progression to it. So there was a depression that happened. I'm 200, I think I was 210, 215 pounds as a police officer. I stopped eating and I went down to 179 pounds. I was in a depression. Everybody could recognize it. I mean, when you lose that much weight and my sergeant goes, oh, those uniforms barely hanging on you. So there was a progression of things that were happening. So the depression turned into the PTSD, the trauma, right? The trauma buckets fell because of that call for service that emptied all of my trauma that I was storing away, and it emptied. And that's when I started turning into this angry police officer, and I went to go get help. And my therapist was great. The problem was I could never focus on the trauma that happened in the past, because things kept happening to me in the present that I had to deal with. So she could never go to the back and heal what happened back here. She had to focus on the present because she was concerned about me, because she knows how this ends, and it doesn't end well. I was yelling at the citizens. I mean, I could not stop myself. I could feel it in my face. My face would I remember the tension I would feel. And when I would yell at them, that's my release. If law enforcement officers who are going through trauma or PTSD cycle, if they get removed from that stimulus, from patrol or whatever it is that's triggering them, it's a feeling of relief and calmness, and now they can go, okay. I mean, every day getting in that car is a trigger. Every car stop is a trigger. I couldn't even drive a car without losing my mind. And this was on duty and off duty. Driving was a trigger for me. And when I get in that car, I'm done. It's over. If you remove those triggers just by saying, okay, hey, we're gonna put you in where they put me in, they put me on the red light camera, which is actually the greatest thing that ever happened to me. Most boring job in the world, but it was great because I wasn't in contact with the community. I was saving myself without kind of realizing I was saving myself. I knew I had to be off the street, I just didn't know what that looked like. If they have a plan and a place for these officers where they have to go to mandatory counseling, mandatory therapy, and honestly, the stuff I have learned about PTSD is we can save ourselves, but I don't think I need to go to jail for 6 months to save myself. I think the department is culpable in this, when they knew something was wrong, but they just didn't care. Or they were uneducated, one of the two. Well, let's educate them. Then we'll find out if they care or not. But if I had a DUI off duty, and I go into the chief and I say, I'm an alcoholic. Do you know what happens to them? Okay, you're on light duty and you have to go to AA meetings. But guess what? You're not fired. You're not in trouble. I mean, you'll get in a little bit of trouble, but you have a job. You have your career still, right? So they treat alcohol as it's normal. Hey, cops drink. Yep. And they got a DUI and you just, I fall on my sword, I'm an alcoholic. But what happens when you have PTSD? Why is that not treated the same? In fact, that's worse, because what actually happens, and if you think about it, is we drink or abuse pills because of the PTSD. They go hand in hand. There needs to be an avenue for spouses to be contacting the department and being like, hey, my husband's not doing well, and then because we won't do it. We rarely do it. It's hard for us to admit that, because it does look like we're weak. And when it falls on deaf ears, that's even worse. I sat in front of that captain, and that captain ended up being the chief that fired me. And I'm in my uniform, and I'm crying in his office. And I said, something is wrong with me. I don't know what it is. And he tells me the story of how I helped this 6-year-old who was sexually molested. And he says, I use that story when I teach at Sac State. That's professionalism. That's what I want back. Captain, that's what I want too. But I don't know what's wrong with me. And that was it. Nothing happened. I went to a lieutenant, and I'm bawling in his office. Something is wrong with me. I don't see what you're seeing. Can you help me? Of course we're going to help you. Nothing. I went to a 3rd lieutenant, and I asked him for help. And he said, you should smile more. My recovery started when I went to jail. When I was in the worst place that a cop can be in. I was in, what they call it, ADSEG, which is, I was isolated from everybody. I was in a room 23 hours, 30 minutes a day. And that's for my safety. But I'm in a pod full of murderers. And I'm in there because I thought I was doing my job. And I started learning about what PTSD is. And Jocko Willink wrote a great book on accountability. So I started, it's really easy to point fingers, and that's what we do when we have PTSD. It's your fault, it's your fault, it's your fault, right? It's you're my wife, you're not supporting me, it's your fault. You're my kids, you're terrible, and it's your fault. Administrators, it's your, right? We'll point fingers all day. We are quick to blame. Well, when you're sitting in a 6x9 cell for 23 hours, 30 minutes a day, you can point fingers all day. But the one thing you learn is you point one finger at somebody and there's 3 more pointing back at you. And until I started understanding what PTSD actually is, what caused it, and then realizing, like, I made those decisions. I made the decision to yell at that person. I made the decisions to, when I got my divorce, or when I moved out, or when I, everything from that moment on, I made those decisions. And when I started taking accountability, now you start learning how to, now you understand that you are responsible for this. Now you got to figure out, how do I heal? And so in jail, you start learning, and you have to meditate, and you have to learn how to kind of find your spirit. Because one of the things that PTSD does is you lose your faith in humanity. You lose your faith in God. You lose your faith in yourself. You are lost. You don't know where you're at. You don't know why you do the things you do, but you react to emotion rather than calming things down. When I played professional baseball, I was good because I could slow the game down. I could mentally slow the game down, and I was good. When I started moving up the ranks, the game got really fast for me, and I realized that these guys are really good. I'm not there. When I became a cop, especially when I was on the SWAT team, you can slow the game down and make really good decisions because you don't turn off your brain, right? When I started going through my PTSD, when I was sitting in jail, writing down everything that I was thinking and feeling and all of these things, I started realizing like the game sped up again. Life sped up. I could not slow it down. I couldn't slow down a call. It was just boom, boom, go, 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 go. And I'm like, that's not how I work. I work methodically. I think my way through things. So once you realize some of those things, and it's like one of the things that I learned was how to get back to the present. So when you do meditative techniques, you start kind of feeling textures of things. You start looking at walls and describing pictures and getting back into the present. And that has helped a lot. I did see a therapist for a while who helped me with those techniques after I got out of jail. But unfortunately, they're so expensive and I can't afford it. But I did learn those techniques. Now I do other things to help heal that. Cold plunge meditation is one of them. It's been really good at bringing me back to center. It's hard to speak for everybody, and I really don't want to because everybody has their own story. But how it affected me, and I'm going to use the kick that ended my career. Could it have been different? And the $1 million question is, would I have done the same thing? So I'm already traumatized. I'm already in my PTSD cycle. I feel rage every time I log on. I feel rage every time I push that gas pedal, and I feel rage every time I'm going to turn on my lights. The $1 million question, would I have done the same thing? And the answer is no, because I should not have been on that street.